This is LCC Radio, WLNZ here in Lansing, Michigan, 89.7 on your dial. This is Bonnie Buckaroo, soon to be joined by Bill Castanier with Lansing Online News Radio. Every Monday evening from 7 until 8, Bill and I chat about current events and current things happening in the community. And tonight we're going to be talking about the recent McCutcheon decision by the Supreme Court and campaign finance reform. We're going to be talking a little bit as well about this is Autism Month, and we're going to be talking about that. But opening this evening, I did want to greet our first guest, and he's in our webcam here, for those of you who are watching on Lansing Online News.
In the green shirt.
In the green shirt. Happy Spartan Day, yes. This is
Yes.
Jonathan Kermian, who is the race director for the Race for the Place, which is the 5K and the fun run coming up on Sunday.
That's correct.
Yes, tell us a little bit about the race.
Well, this is the 20th year for the Race for the Place. The Race for the Place has been one of the primary fundraising sources for the MSU Safe Place, which is a domestic shelter and advocacy program against domestic violence on campus. So it's one of the few in the country that serves a large population like this.
It's for sure the only one in the Big Ten, and it may be the only one at a major university.
I think that's correct.
It is, and I mean it's a great testament to Joanne McPherson.
Yes, she was instrumental in getting it going.
She was the person who took the heat. I always got the biggest kick out of her. I was coordinating the Victims in the Media program, and I would have lunch with her periodically, and she had painted fingernails with S's on them from
Absolutely.
the Spartans.
She was over the top.
She was. She'd sit there in her velour tracksuit and smoke cigarettes and tell you how great the race was going to be.
She was a real character.
She was. I loved her. She was great. So that was what's going to happen at Sunday's race this year?
Well, Sunday race will start at 1 o'clock. It's the second race in the Playmakers Race Series. So there's a series of 12 races. So some people are interested in that. But we'll have Sparty there. We'll have a kids run as well, following at 1:45. It's the 5K is goes through campus along the river. So it's very it's a very scenic. Hopefully there'll be some flowers out now. Scenic
a few
route.
Crocuses, I think, is about what you're gonna.
What's that?
Maybe a few crocuses.
A few crocuses, yeah. This time of year, usually we have a lot more blooming, but it's been a late spring. But hopefully the weather will be nice.
You get 700 to 1,000 runners each year, don't you?
We're shooting again for 1,000. We haven't reached 1,000 yet. We had about 800 some last year, so it's a big race, and it is one of the oldest now in the area.
That's great.
Typically, we raise anywhere from $16,000 for Safe Place, and all that goes to support the work that they do, the counseling, the shelter, the educational outreach programs. So it's vital to keeping Safe Place going.
The university deserves great credit for acknowledging the problem, because so many universities don't want to admit that dating violence and spousal violence exists, and they just really would want to pretend that somehow our community is free of that. But this is a wonderful opportunity to show support for those issues and come out and have a great time at the race.
Oh, absolutely. And there's a discount for students. So the LCC students listening, make sure you let us know that you're full-time or even a part-time student, and you'll get a discount to the entry.
And you allow race day entries?
Yes, we do. Of course, encourage that. So,
John, are there any speedsters coming? I mean,
there always is a few
runners
speedsters. Yes,
because of MSU.
we always get a few people that run under 16 minutes for a 5K, which is real fast.
Yeah.
But the vast majority, and we also have a walk included. So, the vast majority either your normal average runner or a walker, and the kids run is a lot of fun. We do get a lot of kids in the kids run. So it's a kids mile as well as an open 100 meter for the real small kids. So the Sparty is out there, and he's they take pictures with Sparty and have a great time. So we also have a group of athletes, maybe some of the basketball players, now that they're not in the Final Four, will be out there to help cheer the kids on.
They might much rather not be there, but
they would much rather not.
Yeah,
I'd much rather not than be someplace else. But I'd encourage you all to come out. And again, if you go to the Safe Place website, there's 20 reasons to give $20, chip in $20 more. So we're having a big campaign to try to raise a little more funds this year. So go to the website, MSU Safe Place at MSU campus, and you can register there. You can also register online Maybe not anymore, but you can also get more information
Yeah.
at playmakers.com. So,
Thanks a lot for coming down and telling us
well,
about
thank you.
it.
Yeah, it's
Now that we're talking about fundraising, I should leap in and talk about the fact that this is the LCC Radio WLNZ 89.7 annual fundraiser event. And those of you who might be interested in supporting this kind of community-based reporting, where we tell you all about community activities and discuss issues and have great music and a variety of different kinds of programming, we would encourage you, you can call right now, area code 517-483-1000. And you can also, if you just think about it later, if you're not near a phone right now or not near your cell phone, you can also go to the website at lcc.edu/radio and look for the members tab. And it's a good opportunity to put a little money into the pot to show some support. It will be really nice if so few people who listen to our show would say, gee, I guess Bonnie and Bill will go ahead and we'll give them $5 for Bonnie and Bill, or $10 or $20 or a lot
Or
of bucks.
unlimited.
Unlimited.
I don't think there's any limitation.
free speech.
We're going to be
Yeah,
talking
free.
about campaign finance reform later. Better that it comes here, I guess. Yes, that would be a better thing.
Sure.
Now, we have a couple other events that we need to talk about. Bill, you're talking about the Lansing Votes thing that's
Right.
coming?
As part of the Lansing Votes, the Historical Society of Greater Lansing is having a brown bag lunch each Wednesday for 4 Wednesdays. We're in our second Wednesday this week, and it's going to be on why Lansing has libraries. And it basically revolves around the Carnegie Library and how it came to be. And it's not atypical, but it's unusual because the Carnegie Library was really started by women. And what makes it unusual, at the time, they couldn't vote in the early 1900s.
We have only had democracy for 93 years.
Right. And so they had to convince their husbands to vote for the money to pay for the Carnegie Library. Carnegie gave a community a library, but he also required them to support it each year with 10% of what the value of the library was.
Wow.
So it had to go to a vote. And that's what we're going to talk about, and how a group of women who had a literary society evolved into the libraries as we know it today. And then on Thursday, we're going to look at historic railroad stations in Michigan through the eyes of Michael Hodge, who's he's the architectural writer for the Detroit News, and he's going to be at Thursday 7 p.m. at the railroad station on South Washington, just past where Rio used to be, and that is focused in his book. It's one of his focal points, and he's going to talk about railroad stations and their architecture and their historic importance.
The ones in Michigan.
Yes, in Michigan only. And he's only doing 30 in his first book, but he plans on doing a series of books. I think there's maybe 150 left, something like that.
Whoa.
There's a lot left. And some of them are in ill repair. We see a lot of porno shots of the Detroit depot, and the Saginaw depot is in a similar situation. They're probably not going to be saved. But depots were very important in creating the historic preservation movement in this country. When they tore Pennsylvania Station down, Jackie Kennedy got involved and created a movement.
My husband and his band, the Urbations, played the last night that the Detroit Railroad Station was open. They did a going out of existence concert in the railroad station, and it was one of the stranger evenings because it was already starting to decay a lot. If you went upstairs, there was a lot of trash and stuff, and it had pretty much been abandoned. But the last night before it officially closed forever, and it was a very strange evening. I mean, and odd too.
I thought it was surreal. Did anyone shoot video?
No.
Oh,
I know.
wow.
I know, and
that would be something.
They held an auction, and the strange thing is, of course, in a railroad station, when you have a band that's electrified play, it bounces off all that marble, and it's like you hear it 50 times.
I've been in it. It's cavernous.
Yeah.
It's also scary. But
It is scary.
Yeah.
It was scary even back then. So that was quite interesting railroad station.
That would have been great video.
Yeah.
Especially in today's world. How many years ago was that? Do you recall?
I was young, so my memory dims.
Okay. Okay.
The Urbations were a long time ago. We're talking probably almost 30 years ago.
Yeah, I think it was in the
25.
mid-70s, maybe.
I was going to say 84 is, I think.
Is it when
I think you're
I
probably right.
can't recall anymore.
Yes, I think it had to be. I think it was about 86, maybe, when we were
Yeah,
there.
great in there.
Yeah. Now, you have another event, which is the
yes.
Rally of Writers. We can't
Rally
forget
of
that.
Writers, which is going really almost to its third decade. Rally of Writers is, I think they call it the oldest continuing operating literary event for writers, and it's been going on forever. And what it involves is 2 days, a night where they have a warm up at Schuler's with speakers, and the three
Friday
speakers
night?
Friday night. It starts at 7 p.m. at Schuler's, Friday the 11th, and it involves this year there's going to be three speakers talking about reading for young people, literacy, and that just kind of gets people in the mood because the next day there's about 30 authors, Saturday, the 12th, and it is at LCC West out on Mount Hope Road. And what it involves is workshops on everything from how to write a memoir, how to promote your book, how to write sex scenes in a book, and experts who have done this and written. Everyone on the program is a published author, and some are very successful authors. Like
What names would we recognize?
that's interesting. I'm wondering if anybody might, but Lori Spielman Nelson, who wrote The Life List just last year, it's her first book. She's about 50. She took the class to write here at LCC,
Hmm.
and it kind of inspired her. And The Life List was a Target pick. It was a Sam's pick. Um, she sold the movie rights already.
Oh,
I mean, it changed her life.
then there's a dinner that night?
No, no dinner.
No
It
dinner?
just goes through the day. It
Okay.
starts about 9 o'clock and runs till about 5. Another person that people might recall is Rick Mercer. We had Rick Mercer on the show
Mhm.
last year. Rick got laid off, decided he was going to pursue what his passion his entire life was, which was write. So he began writing for ebooks only. And I talked to him last Friday. He's now in his 8th book in 3 years, and he's sold 800,000 copies.
It's astounding.
And it doesn't take a lot of math to figure out. He
And you
said
keep
that it's a lot of money.
You keep more of those than you would if you were working for the publisher.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you would have never sold
And it's
800,000 copies in your lifetime.
and his detective is on a cruise ship, and it's
Yes.
modeled after someone from LPD.
You're right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
quite
And
interesting.
it's a serial thriller kind of.
Yeah.
He said to me he's going to go back and re-edit his first book again
Oh,
because he wants to change the tone of some things.
Hmm.
And it's very interesting, but I think that surprises a lot of people to know that someone like that is in our community and can give them advice.
now that I would flock down there for that alone.
He promised me when he went over 1 million, he would be back
Good.
because he wants to talk about it. A couple other names that people might know would be Lev Raphael.
Mm-hmm.
He's a longtime standard here.
Mm-hmm.
Beverly Jenkins is interesting.
Oh,
Now,
she's wonderful.
yes, okay, you know her, but
Mhm.
she's probably the leading romance writer for African Americans.
Yeah.
I mean, she's written like 25 romances. She's
Yeah.
very successful. She's right up there. Andrea King Collier,
yeah.
who you know, who
Yes.
has written several books.
And been
will be
on the
there.
show.
Right. Yeah. And then the keynote is a woman named Fleta Brown, who was at one time the poet laureate of Vermont, and she's going to talk about how to write a memoir. Memoir writing is very popular right now.
Yeah.
So it's the other thing I like to tell them is it's cheap. It's like $70.
Is it on
75.
Sunday as well, or it's
Nope.
no
just
Friday night and Saturday?
Friday's free.
Okay.
Saturday for all day the sessions is $70.
Wow.
And it's probably the biggest bargain. If this was in, say, San Francisco, it probably cost $500.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And
No.
people, there are
It's a quality
20,
event.
20 some seats left. That's all.
Oh, wow.
So if anybody's listening is kind of thinking about it, you better do it today or tomorrow.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
going to sell out again. They sell out about 200
They
seats.
do. Yeah.
And Linda Peckham, who organized it that so long ago, is still the kind of the force behind this.
That's such a great event. This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. Bill and I are talking now with Rich Robinson. I'm going to have to remember to move the webcam so that we don't have it staring at the wall. Those of you who would like to see the live webcast can go to LansingOnlineNews.com and find it there. It's also on Ustream, and we'll be putting it up on YouTube later tonight. So we have triple threat here for our video production. But Rich, this is absolutely perfect timing because Rich is with the Michigan Campaign Finance Reform. What is the proper name?
Campaign Finance Network.
Finance Network, that's it. I couldn't remember the exact name. I always get it a little bit wrong. But we are on the heels of the McCutcheon decision, the SCOTUS decision. The Supreme Court of the United States last week announced that this is one in a continuing series of decisions that we think are going to pretty much gut campaign finance reform to the point where this will be unrecognizable.
I think that's right. I mean, all of this coming after the McCain-Feingold reforms were
Yes.
passed into law in 2003, began with a decision in FEC against Wisconsin Right to Life, where corporate money was allowed back in for issue advocacy. And then to Citizens United, where
Huge.
corporate money was allowed in to say expressly vote for, vote against a candidate. And really the big impact of that decision was the growth of the social welfare nonprofits and the business associations as well, U.S. Chamber of Commerce in particular, and the very big footprint in American political campaigns. And now this takes the aggregate limit off what an individual can give to all kinds of political committees.
To the number of different.
To the candidate committees, to the party committees, and to the political action committees combined. It was the case that you could give no more than $123,000 in a 2-year election cycle, and to put that in context, that's more than the net worth of the majority of American households.
Oh.
So,
And to me, that seemed obscene level.
Yeah,
I mean,
it
I thought
does.
that was like, wow, that's a lot.
it is a lot of money. And, the interesting thing about this is there were only 591 Americans who hit the maximum as far as the contributions to candidates in the last election cycle. So that's 1 out of 500,000 people. It was that very select group of individuals whose freedoms were set loose with this decision.
Was anyone on that list from Michigan by chance? That's a softball.
Well, I didn't go back and look at the list. The Sunlight Foundation published a list of who the 1% of the 1% were in the last cycle. There were a number of members of the DeVos family on the top donor list, including some of the third generation, the adult grandchildren of Rich and Helen DeVos. But the way they achieve this is really just by changing the definition of what political corruption is.
That's the part that I think
I mean,
is so
essentially,
poisonous.
unless you can produce a contract between a donor and an office holder that says, you're giving me this much money and this is what I'm going to do for you as a result of that.
Short of that, you can't prove it.
Short of that, you can't prove anything. They would suggest that it's merely pedestrian gratitude if you as an independent spender, for example, spend $1 million to buy a week-long television ad campaign for a U.S. senator or something. It's a lot more than that, obviously it is. And, one of the things that struck me in reading this decision it was just a half-baked effort on the part of Chief Justice Roberts. And Justice Breyer in his dissent called him out on a number of occasions that, you're undoing an act of Congress here. Where is the record on which this is based other than your own opinions of what corruption is? And Justice Breyer included a number of appendices to his dissent that involved testimony that a number of legislators had given at the time the McCain-Feingold law was being considered by Congress, who talked about the corrupting nature of having to ask major donors. At the time, the target was soft money contributions to the political parties, unlimited corporate gifts, but could only be used for get out the vote or voter registration or the like. They were also used for issue ads at that time, but they said that that was the basis for assigning committee chairmanships in the Congress. I mean, it's corrupting in any number of ways, and it certainly gives that donor a huge advantage in advancing their policy desires.
When we take a look at what happened a couple of weeks ago, where Sheldon Adelson held his sort of the Sheldon primary out there in Las Vegas because he put 90 million into Newt Gingrich's campaign, which was the only thing that kept it afloat for all those many months. He has now decided that he wants them to compete for those dollars, so he's holding a horse race in essence. I guess he's the only one that gets to bet on the outcome of that race. And it means that things like Chris Christie, of whom I am no fan, but when he says the dreaded phrase occupied territories, he has to go back later and kiss Adelson's ring and beg for forgiveness because you can't call it occupied territories if the person who's offering you as much as maybe $100 million is going to say no. You have to say that that is those are not occupied territories. We are not occupying those places. So it distorts policy.
It does distort policy, and that was reminiscent of Adelson taking Mitt Romney around
Yes.
Jerusalem during the campaign year in 2012, and he looked like his poodle at that
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
But absolutely, there is a corruption of dependence on the money that the big donor offers. And I think the point you make is absolutely right. Is this going to be the basis of U.S. foreign policy, the desires of some billionaire who holds it out like bait for people to chase?
We have a two-tiered society. We have the donor society and everybody else. And Bill was talking earlier that our donations don't matter then. I mean,
absolutely not. What would $100 mean?
right.
It's useless.
It's inconsequential.
It's inconsequential. So people will stop probably giving.
That's the
I mean,
downside as
that's-
well.
I can't match in any way, shape, or form, even if there's 100 million of me. You can't
Well,
match it.
The Obama campaign did quite well in doing that kind of citizen fundraising because they could micro-target. Very expensive to
Right.
do it, but I mean, at the same time, you can go all the way down to this, the absolute household where you walk up with an ad virtually tailored to that specific household on an iPad and show it to them. But that's just simply, I mean, trying to generate money that way as opposed to one individual doing it with the stroke of a pen.
I don't know of an example in a congressional race where somebody has come anywhere near the success of the Obama campaign
That's
in
the other problem.
generating support from small donors. And I think Bill's absolutely right about that. It not only discourages participation as a donor, but I'm afraid it's going to discourage participation as a voter, and that's the real tragedy. And I think that's the ultimate tragedy here is this is a huge blow to the idea of democracy.
Well, what we had originally invited you to come and tell us about was the 2014 turnout because we're looking down the barrel of a very important election, both at the state level and at the federal level. And what is this going to mean how is this going to change the race?
Well, again, it's conjecture because, as noted, only 590 people gave money at this level last time around. However, this is a cultural green light. So if there are individuals out there who have a lot of money and frankly, they may see an advantage to their policy needs in jumping in.
I mean, when you look at Adelson, the other issue for him, obviously, is avoiding any kind of internet gambling because he owns gambling casinos. And I think he'd even throw Israel under the bus. Well, maybe not, but but I mean, there is this also the not too enlightened self-interest argument here.
Oh, and in his case, a large part of his motivation, I think, for that spending in 2012 was a former employee had gone whistleblower and turned him in for bribing
Yes.
Chinese officials. He has the biggest casino in Macau.
Yeah.
And that is violation of United States law, and he desperately wanted a different Justice Department at the
Yes.
time. But absolutely, he's got a policy agenda, and certainly there are those who are interested in grabbing the revenue stream of public education, seeing it as a revenue stream rather than a cause of enabling the next generation of Americans. There are a lot of issues out there that can be steered in a significantly.
We saw the privatization movement going on. Now it's prison food. I mean, all of the kinds of services that we typically provided, and they were good jobs and stable jobs, that people could have belonging to a union and working for the state. Now those are outsourced into private contractors. And
Right.
pulling that profit out to pay the person who owns the company makes a difference.
What what do you think it's going to do to a typical, say, like our Senate race?
Yeah.
Living. I mean, how much money, how much will it go up? And what are we going to?
Well, uh, it's an interesting question. I mean, I think the fundamental rule is you don't spend money if you know you're going to win or you know you're going to lose. And right now, this looks like a horse race. Uh, but at some point, Terry Land's going to have to open her mouth. And so it's not altogether certain what this is going to look like as it plays out. But uh, it could easily get into the 30, $40 million range. And that's not likely to be a lot of individual contributions. That's likely to be a lot of spending by the nonprofit social welfare organizations and so forth. Uh, in the U.S. Senate race, Americans for Prosperity has been advertising consistently since the middle of January.
Right,
They've taken
already.
a couple breaks,
Yeah.
but for the purposes of the Federal Election Commission, that's not part of the record at all because it doesn't fall within 60 days of Election Day. So even though the messages are effectively the same as they would be the month before Election Day, uh, there's not a requirement to report that to the Federal Election Commission. So uh, this is kind of a doubly dark money. Not only do we not know who's giving the money to Americans for Prosperity, even though we have some informed guesses, there really isn't a convenient record of how much they're actually spending in total. And I'd say this, in the 2012 election cycle, what the FEC knew was about 310 million spent by 501c4 and C6 organizations. In Michigan, only a third of what was spent by the nonprofit corporations was reported to the FEC
Oh,
because it didn't fall
fall into
within the
that.
window of the
Oh.
election, even though they picked up with a consistent advertising campaign the day after Michigan's presidential primary. So uh, if we were typical of other states where the nonprofits played, there's probably another $500 million that was spent by those organizations that's nowhere to be found in the public record. So it could be huge, Bill. And I think the thing is that uh, people are seeing it taken out of their hands. I mean, it's not Michigan donors. It's not even identifiable human beings. I mean, this is, money's coming out of a big dark cloud.
What we're seeing is this never-ending campaign. So part of what that does is it also turns voters off. So you depress the turnout, and we know that the right tends to win when turnout is down, and the left tends to win when turnout is up. So that's automatically a prevailing factor. The other thing that concerns me is that the bulk of people in the United States get most of their news, including their news about elections, from TV news. And that's where most of this money is spent. It's not spent in print advertising, it's spent on television. So the media, the local media in particular, which has been struggling with the digital world and with the recession, is addicted to this kind of campaign cash. It means they keep out alternative candidates, third-party candidates, people with other ideas. It becomes a two-party horse race. And they're less likely, I think, to be critical of the way in which these are being funded because, quite honestly, they're dependent on the funding. So I wouldn't hold my breath waiting for an investigative report on the dark money going into a lot of these campaigns.
I think that's right. And one of the things that happened in 2012 was that the Federal Communications Commission implemented a requirement that the four major network stations in the top 50 media markets in the country start uploading records of their political sales to a web-based public file. And the intent was to make access to those records more easily
Transparent.
achieved.
Yeah.
The unintended consequence was that some of the stations decided at the time, well, your regulations say we have to do this about matters of national interest, read about federal candidates, but they're silent on matters of state importance. And so some of the stations have stopped including records about issue ads about state candidates in their
Ah.
public files. So I have always used those data to say, this is how big the black box is. I can't tell you who's stuffing money in the black box, but I can tell you how big the box is. So there's a record. When we decide finally to deal with this situation, there's a record of how big a problem we've got. We're losing the capacity to say how big the problem is when these records become lost. So this is one of the dreary unintended consequences. And I mean, uh, people talk about the hydraulics of campaign finance. You know, you try to plug the dam over here and the water runs out over on the other side. Uh, the people who are committed to anonymity for donors, leaving no fingerprints on the money, are tireless
Yeah.
in inventing new schemes to try to hide the tracks of what they're doing because they don't want accountability. They don't want to be recognized with what they're doing.
They pay lip service to the idea of transparency, but they never pass anything that requires it.
Now, what kind of impact do you think will this have locally?
Well, uh,
Local elections.
local
I need to
elections.
burst in for just
Yep.
a second
Okay.
so that we don't get into trouble with the FCC, because this is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. We're talking with Rich Robinson. And we also wanted to remind our listeners that this might be a good time to take some of that money that they might have burning a hole in their pocket and donate it to community radio here at LCC. The telephone number to do so is area code 517-483-1000. And this is a wonderful place to be able to hear news about stories like this that you might not hear on commercial media. We would also encourage you to go to the website lcc.edu/radio and click on the members tab, because there's another opportunity there for you. If you don't want a telephone, you can always pay by credit card right there on the website. And we would love to have your donations and show that you care about programming like this, because Rich is explaining to us the challenge where you not only can't we've now defined corruption out of existence, so that we can't say anything is corrupt anymore.
They couldn't
You
make
can-
American Shuffle.
No, they couldn't.
It's a little different,
Yeah.
but I mean, it would have be a funny American Shuffle.
I do find it a little odd. I think Blago must be spinning after some of these Supreme Court decisions, because he's doing a hard time in stir for what now looks relatively benign in comparison.
If you're a street gang running a protection racket,
Yeah.
you offer protection. I don't want anything in return.
Of course.
When I walk by on Friday, if there's an envelope of cash, it'll be welcome. But there's no explicit statement. I mean, these things are implied.
Yeah.
And it's the same for organized crime as it is for politics.
If you're not smart enough to figure out how to have the language straight.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's
The
all.
water main is going to break in front of your store.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, if a politician can't dissemble, what can they do?
Well, it's going to be a difficult year, I think, for the Dems across the country because of all the new voter suppression laws going in. Michigan has never had any early voting, and they don't have a very. Terry Lynn Land, when I heard her speak in front of the League of Women Voters, was urging Michigan to do that. I think that tune's going to change pretty quickly. We're going to see voting. You're thinking this really imperils voting.
I think it could. I think it could be enough of a discouragement to people that it can engender a sense of hopelessness, I think, that you're just up against a tide of money, and what do how do you stand on the tracks and the billionaires' train is coming?
We've been lucky enough to have, he was 15 when he started, Roman Collins, who was part of the move to amend here in the community, really trying to get a constitutional amendment passed to say that corporations are not people, and that therefore they should not be granted free speech. We're on the cusp of maybe having them granted religious rights as well. I mean, we're really seeing a sea change in what the country would stand for. Do those movements stand a chance?
Well, I don't know, Bonnie. I have for a time thought in context of the Equal Rights Amendment and that struggle and how it ended up, and
that's not very encouraging.
Well, it's not. I mean, it's a little bit like thinking we're going to levitate the Pentagon, and those of us of a certain age remember
I tried.
that's
Jerry
not
Rubin.
possible.
Yeah.
But Now, retired Justice John Paul Stevens has suggested that there ought to be an amendment that says nothing in the Constitution prohibits the right of the people or the Congress to require regulation of money in political campaigns. And that gets away from kind of the flashpoint piece about corporate personhood and that sort of thing. But I think it accomplishes what needs to be done. But it's a heavy lift, you know. I mean, I think about it, and I believe I could probably name 13 states that would be a real long shot to support any kind of regulation.
Yeah, I think the money arrayed against it again.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, and there's been a concerted effort to take over state governments because they're in control of things like redistricting that have a profound effect on the outcome of elections.
And they also have less scrutiny.
That's right. That's right.
I mean, you have a National Press Corps that tries to keep track of what's happening at the national level, but they simply don't have similar resources at the media at the state level, and it's an extremely difficult thing for them to do. And it's very hard. You get buried under paperwork, and you don't have enough staff to be able to do all the digging that's necessary. But this ultimately destabilizes the country.
I think it does. I mean, look what's happening to the economy. Uh, the policy choices being made uh, are for the benefit of those who are these major donors, not for the overall good of the economy. I mean, this is a demand-driven economy.
We look at all the issues and we look at the polling. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, sensible gun control, all of these different issues. The people are for these kinds of reforms, but there's simply the money arrayed against it is simply enormous, and that drives politicians who really are desperate for campaign cash. I read that if you are a representative, in Congress, that you're probably spending 30% of your time on fundraising, and
I've
that
heard
seems to me just ridiculous.
a higher number
Really?
than that, and heard also from a former member of Congress that absolutely committee chairmanships are parsed out on the basis of how successful you are at fundraising.
Well, the one growth industry will be political consulting.
And you know the interesting thing about that, think back to the 2012 campaign. A week before Election Day, there came a super PAC called Hardworking Americans.
I love the names.
Now, Hardworking Americans was three people.
Yeah,
Doug DeVos, the president of Amway, Mike Jandernoa, who runs or formerly ran a generic drug manufacturer in Allegan County, and Sheldon Adelson. Adelson put in $1 million for an ad campaign to kneecap Debbie Stabenow during the last week before Election Day. Debbie was up by 20 points before that ad campaign, and she won by 21. Who won in that? The political consultant who placed the ads, who got a 15% share.
Yes.
So if he can talk Adelson into blowing another $1 million on top of the other 150, he's a winner in a big way. So that's an interesting turn. One of the things I think about is what's the future of television advertising? Because right now the millennials don't watch television on
know.
a schedule,
I know.
and within 6 to 8 years, probably nobody will.
And you
It'll
can
all
buzz
be
through
on.
them with your DVR now.
Well, I understand Netflix embeds them in such a way that they force you to look at them,
Oh.
but it's getting trickier at least, and I don't know that you can just buy the local news and think you're going to reach so many eyeballs with a message. So that's a complication, and I think the television broadcasters are conscious of it too, and it'll be interesting to see how all that evolves going forward.
What fascinates me is that we see people who are in that 1% class working so hard to avoid paying any taxes, but they will spend literal fortunes in order to try to influence races. The only thing we've been able to count on so far is they've been fairly dumb and they have some dumb consultants.
Yeah.
And that's been an advantage. We're now joined by Mary Sharp. I'd like to bring her into the conversation. She's with the Mid-Michigan Autism Association. And one of the things that you must think about is you would like to see research money go into something like finding out the causes of autism or the best way to treat various kinds of conditions. It must frustrate you when you see this money being wasted instead on ads that drive you crazy every time you try to watch TV.
Well, it's all part of the process,
Ah,
isn't it? We've seen a lot of funding from multiple areas in multiple disciplines going into autism research. We're 20 years into some very significant research from the genetic point of view, from the biochemical, pathophysiologic, immunologic uh, interface with the central nervous system function, and it's pretty cool stuff. You know, 25 years ago, you could hear the wind whistling through the door. So it's very interesting how things have changed. I think in 10 or 20 years, we're going to see a whole different political process than what we have now. Many of those factors that you cited, the millennials don't watch TV. So the strategies, I think that the people adapt faster than the reactionary uh,
forces do.
forces do.
Yeah. Well,
The young people have way different ways of thinking about things.
I think that's a really optimistic view, Mary.
It is. Well, if you live with individuals with autism, you make your choice.
You
don't
must be more optimistic than I guess. But then tell us the results of some of the new research that we're seeing. Have we yet come to the point where we can say that we know what some of the root causes of autism are?
Absolutely.
And it's coming from?
Uh, there is a perfect storm of genetic vulnerability
Okay.
and then autoimmune processes played out during the development of the fetus that affect the central nervous system, and the ability to locate exactly where that's happening is increasing. There's a number of fascinating studies going on uh, about imaging, so that if you talk to a bunch of academics now about what are the critical issues with autism, first of all, there's lots and lots of autisms. It's going to
Right.
turn out to be, when you say
We're not
you have,
talking a spectrum. Yeah.
yes, a big spectrum and multiple correlates. But there's about
But are we talking about the exposure of the fetus in the womb to a variety of different chemicals in background radiation?
more
What are we talking about?
more complex than that.
What is
If
it?
you
What are the-
if you talk about, epidemiology was the area that started to pick up that you had disease clusters.
Mhm.
And then once in a while, you could get lucky and identify one causative agent. And of course, the best example of that is thalidomide. Um, our environment is changing so rapidly. We have so much more foreign, weird stuff in the air, in the water,
Right.
in the food. That the term now is the junction between genetics and the environment, and they call it the episome. And so you look at a human, who is multiple different organ system functions, and the episome, their immune system's ability to respond to things. There's a big genetic determination of that.
Genetics loads the gun, but environment pulls the trigger.
Oh, good.
And
But the environment is actually layers and layers of complication. It's not ever going to be with autism one thing, but it's multiple things. It's probably going to turn out in autism that it's more the immunologic exposures, including viral infections, bacterial infections, internal vigilance systems in the immune system that have been challenged by something, and then when a baby is hatching inside, the mother's immune system has reactions that contribute to impairing the central nervous system
we know
development.
that part of the increase in rates relates to the better diagnostic tools that we have nowadays and a greater awareness of the people on the spectrum. But what are the statistics that show the frequency then and now? What are the best determinants what kind of figures can you give us about how much the problem's been growing over time?
Well, they're pretty amazing. My son, who is, and I knew you were going to ask me that, and I was going to check that one number before I came down here. Um, there has been a lot of challenge in some of the academic circles about whether there's an increase
Right.
or whether there is absolutely hands down an increase.
Right.
My son is 24. When he was first diagnosed, we were told that there was an occurrence rate of 1 in every 2,500 children. And the CDC just had its surprise announcement last week that in 2011 it was 1 in 88. And I think we're at 1 in 68 now, but that's the number that I didn't have time to look up.
So this is like polio.
Right.
I mean,
Um,
It's worse, I think.
I mean, yeah, it's
polio
worse
didn't
than
have those
polio.
rates.
Well, and
that's what I mean, I'm just using that as an example.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah,
the
yeah.
same
Right.
disease.
if you think of this as something that is an internal reaction against multiple assaults on the immune system, we're going to see that increasingly. More of our populations live in urban densities. There are studies after studies that can do correlations. Remember, correlation is not causation, but correlations with, you know, diesel fume exhaust,
Koch brothers, we'll get back to them in a moment. Oh, sorry.
et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
It makes me wonder about a place like China. Do you have a sense for?
Oh,
Good
absolutely.
Great
question.
question.
Yeah.
The international studies that are being done, and they're being done in places like the developing world and the developed world, if we make those distinctions, show that there is increases across the board in across cross culture, independent of culture, independent of socioeconomic status, independent of education, independent of religion,
Does China have
independent.
this a rate similar to ours, higher than ours, lower than ours?
I am not aware of the statistics in China.
Mm.
I think China, you know, there's so many cultural implications about the healthcare system.
How would they, are they counting on
Right,
the same?
right.
Yeah,
And
this is
so-
the same problem when you try to compare crime across countries. It's
Yes.
Very different.
But
Yeah.
they're an environmental disaster.
They are.
And the greatest human migration in history is playing out there with
Yeah.
the urbanization. in China.
Yes.
So
But you know what I wonder about, Rich? Because when I look at it, the smog is coming from coal and oil and all the things that we have already been dealing with. We in this country, however, have this extremely sophisticated economy built on exotic chemicals. Years ago, I was interviewing the head of the biochem lab here in Michigan, and he was saying to me that during the PBB era, we released 2,000 to 3,000 new organic and inorganic chemicals every year into the environment, and we do 2 tests. We see if we give high doses to rats, how many it kills, and if we paint it on the side of the little rat's body, does it itch? Because that means the workers might have to have extra protection. That's all we do. And we don't have any idea what that chemical does in combination with others. I mean, we have so many
Well,
new
and
exotic chemicals.
over
coming
time with UV radiation,
Oh.
one of the things about how much do we know about debris in the ocean
in. Oh,
compared
yeah.
to a month ago? One of the what I thought was one of the most significant comments was, you know, we're seeing what a garbage pollution, all the plastic, and the individual who was talking about how plastic degrades is that this is not biodegradation. This is just sun exposure making a visible piece of plastic into
Particles.
millions of invisible pieces of
tiny
plastic.
The fish are then eating, and we eat the fish.
Yeah.
No, you eat
And
it.
we are
No, but
really, we are experimenting. I mean, it wasn't until the 1950s that we came up with using leftover nerve gas as fertilizer for our food. I don't know who thought that was a great idea. It seemed to me we could have just gotten rid of those stocks, but
Well,
we found out we
Well,
could use it
we
to
use
kill
the
bugs.
byproduct of coal
Oh, yeah.
to fertilize.
No, that's natural
We're
gas.
getting far afield from one of the things that I was hoping we could talk about
Sure.
today. What's going on with central nervous system imaging is really very, very interesting. We're beginning to have one of the some of the new information is that we definitely have identified cross genetic relation between schizophrenia, bipolar disease, the autisms, and depression.
Mm.
Those are all murking around in probably the same, 500
Really?
gene combinations. Now, remember in genes, we're not talking about chromosomes. We're talking about actual genetic material. We do know that autism is more likely when the parents are older. For women, this means older than 30 years.
Oh,
But this is not a positive or a negative gene. It's not like you have it or you don't have it. Usually, the errors in genetic vulnerability have to do with a replication of the gene material, where they get duplications, deletions, and replication phenomena. So that's difficult to predict random. We do know that, of course, that these errors occur with increasing frequency the older your genetic material is.
and the
So
longer
what
it's
can
been
you-
under assault.
What kind of research is being done to show ways to decrease this?
Well,
I
that's
mean, we're getting to what it's the
that's
causation.
sort of what I was trying to
Oh,
lead
okay.
up to.
Okay.
Because remember, I am an optimist compared to all the
'Cause
negative
all the-
Nellies in this
we
room.
may know everything we need to know about how it's caused, but how do you stop it?
Right.
This is similar to research that is being done in cross psychiatric disease. The reason I keep going back to imaging is because what we're seeing now in neuroimaging techniques is where you take the invisible and we're starting to measure it. So there's this problem where you have all this social communication disorder, and the brain works with a powerful need for repetition, need for sameness, rigidity, and then social communication disorder. That's the other, the major definer. The most effective treatments, the best studied treatments, are within a realm of psychology called applied behavior analysis. We have now had imaging studies that looked at kids before they had ABA and then looked at kids after ABA. You're not getting injected with anything. You're not even having to do calisthenics with ABA. It's getting kids to think in different patterns. And you're seeing a before and after.
That's wonderful news, actually, because we've had so many pharmacological solutions for men, what I think are just being a kid. I think the diagnosis is if you're a kid, they're going to find a pill for it because kids are mostly a pain when they're acting up and running around. So
Well, it also correlates with many people's spiritual traditions.
yeah.
That and many folk beliefs that we do heal ourselves. Outlook is everything. So that if humans, and part of what is remarkable about humans, was it Blink, the one where you have all of your analytical stuff and you come to the conclusion that a human could do, that a human who lets themselves think gets it in a millisecond because they're putting all this stuff together faster than if you have to piece it out and try and make it a mathematical, sequential, linear, deductive reasoning process. So that the human's ability to heal itself, we're going to find increasingly that there's some amazing stuff that humans can do.
But now I'm going to
Zen
get
Buddhism.
But now I'm going to get you, Mary. We need more tax dollars for early intervention in the schools.
Actually, the early intervention, Michigan is unusual. 3 years ago, when we passed the legislation that required coverage for autism, there was a lot of conflict in the disability community, the mental health disability, because they said, why are you picking autism out? And what they failed to study in the problem set that was being addressed is that there has been no other disorder like autism, and often the codicil and related developmental disabilities is specifically excluded from health policies, that has been a uniform acceptable standard. There was not statements that said, and this excludes people with schizophrenia, bipolar depression disease. So that was why the legislation needed to be changed, that required insurance companies to not be able to hide behind the stamp routine, we're going to exclude autism and developmental disabilities. So that was the major component with that.
Now, does Obamacare automatically, because of its improvement in dealing with mental conditions?
We'll get to that. approximately the estimates, the terms that they've been using the last year is that 60% of the kids in the state of Michigan are covered by Medicaid or Medicaid products.
Wow.
That is very different than the adult population. This is another documentation that our children disproportionately live in poverty.
Yeah.
But if you have Medicaid as your major insurer, and you're making the legislative changes to traditional insurance policies that are regulated by the state of Michigan, you can legislate that. But Medicaid is a public insurance. Part of the legislation was that they passed the requirement that Medicaid, children who are with Medicaid, it was also required that they receive evidence-based services. Huge, big deal that's largely scooted under the radar. What this has meant is that the community mental health systems throughout the state, which are the behavioral mental health treatment agency for individuals with Medicaid, that they have now had to put together an equivalent passage or an equivalent package for what is provided by a traditional insurance that's regulated by the state of Michigan. So we're seeing, and the certification is very rigorous for board certified behavior analysts, but that's what we're starting to see now. And it is just specifically for the kids with autism. And if it's Medicaid, we only pay for it from diagnosis through age 5.
Mary, remind our listeners, if you have these numbers, about how many potential cases of autism we have, how many people have that in our state?
Well, in the older populations, it's very difficult. Right. There are studies that suggest that we have very high penetration in the penal system of individuals with mental health disease, but particularly with autism. And it's about 17,000 kids in the public schools that are being served through special education under the they don't diagnose in the schools, they determine if you qualify for services under a label of autism. So that's 17,000 in the state of Michigan, up from about 2,000 in 1990.
Many kids in that spectrum do extremely well with things in this digital world.
One of the things,
that's one of the good aspects of this.
One of the things that we like people to start being aware of is that not all children or individuals with autism have intellectual impairment. That is a different phenomena. Many of our kids do have intellectual disability, and that, of course, can make things more complicated in terms of maximizing the outcome. Although Dr. Luke Tsai was a much beloved, wonderful psychiatrist in the pediatric department at University of Michigan, he was one of the only really good hot shots that would treat kids on the spectrum. He'd retired a few years ago, but he said that oftentimes he felt that the kids with the higher functioning autism, who didn't have intellectual disability, had a much harder time because people expected more from them.
Oh.
That they're very verbal, so why can't they have a lick of sense? You know, you're so bright when it comes to history. Why can't you, sit down and make nice at the dinner table?
Yeah.
Why do you
blurt out things that people might not want to hear?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh. Well, one of the things we've done this month for Autism Month is that Mary has graciously agreed to provide somebody who will come each week for the next 3 weeks, and we will be following up with more and more information about what's happening with autism. It is an important part of our community and an important part of our future, and I think it's still an area where not many people know all there is to know about what's going on all these different fronts.
Absolutely not. But there's
So
very cool stuff going on in Michigan.
We will
finally.
invite you to join us. Thank you to Rich Robinson, and we really appreciate talking about campaign finance reform. Remember that it is Pledge Week here, Pledge Day at LCC Radio. 517-483-1000 is the number during the day where you can reach people. lcc.edu/radio, and go to the members tab to donate online. This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing. Tune in next Monday night at 7. Thank you.